Hello, and welcome to Echoes of the Forgotten Earth, a place where curiosity lowers its voice, where science doesn't sprint, it wanders, and where the mind can loosen its grip while the planet tells a story in slow motion. Tonight, our gentle path leads us far south past the last stretch of road, past forests that can whisper back, past skies that feel familiar, into a region that seems designed for silence. A place where light can linger for months, and darkness can do the same. A place where wind doesn't simply blow, it sculpts. It combs the surface into long ribs and sharp seams, polishing emptiness until it looks like glass. This is Antarctica, the coldest desert on Earth, the driest, and in many ways, the least disturbed. A wilderness so wide it can make even the idea of distance feel like a guess. A place so spare that sound itself seems unsure of where to rest. And yet for all its severity, Antarctica has been quietly warming something in the human imagination. Not because of penguins, not because of icebergs calving like thunder at the edge of the sea, not even because of the glaciers, those slow, heavy rivers that creep across rock with the patience of centuries. No. In recent years, the spark has been something else. Shapes. Dark, angular forms that appear in satellite images like punctuation marks in an endless white sentence. Triangles where the mind expects randomness. Lines that look too clean from far above. Peaks that, for a second just long enough to catch your breath, seem to resemble something we've seen before in other places, in other ages. Some people call them mountains. Others, with that unmistakable shine in their voice, the kind that belongs to a story before it belongs to proof, call them pyramids. And whether those shadows are the honest work of geology or the result of something we've forgotten how to recognize, the idea has taken root all over the world, because it doesn't just propose a structure, it proposes a question. Pyramids in Antarctica. Even the phrase feels like a door opening somewhere in the back of the mind. It invites the oldest kind of wondering, the kind that predates textbooks and timelines. What if we're missing a chapter? What if the history we repeat to ourselves, our neat line of then and now, has gaps wide enough to swallow whole worlds? What if something once endured here, in the place we now call unlivable? And what if the cold itself has been doing what cold does best? Preserving, sealing, keeping holding answers beneath a clear, hard lid of ice for longer than language has existed. Before we drift deeper into that hush of possibility, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? Somewhere warm, maybe. Somewhere the air feels soft, where winter is just a picture on a screen. Or perhaps you're already in the season of long nights, with wind brushing the walls, and the idea of Antarctica doesn't feel distant so much as familiar. Wherever you are, imagine this: a continent so vast it holds the majority of Earth's fresh water, locked away as ice. A surface so bright it can throw sunlight back into space. And yet, so dark in its unknowns, that entire legends can bloom from a single look at its map. If this kind of quiet exploration helps your thoughts slow down, if you like the feeling of being carried by questions without needing to solve them tonight, then you already understand what this channel is meant to be. A small pocket of calm where wonder can stay awake, even as you begin to drift. So settle in. Let your breathing soften. Let the warmth around you balance the chill of what we're about to walk through. Because tonight, we're following a trail that begins the way many modern mysteries begin. Not with a torch in a cave, but with a glow on a screen. A handful of coordinates, a few images captured by machines that never sleep, and a familiar pattern the human brain can't help but reach for when it sees certain angles in the snow. Somewhere between science and speculation, between mountains and myth, there is a whisper that keeps returning, a whisper beneath the ice. It started quietly, almost casually. In the mid-2010s, polar satellite imagery began circulating beyond the scientific world and into public hands. Not polished documentary footage, not measured field photos, just stark, high-contrast glimpses. white expanses interrupted by dark forms, like ink spilled across paper. In one set of images, a triangular peak rose from Antarctica's interior with an outline that felt unnervingly tidy. Sharp shoulders, slanted faces, a symmetry that didn't look like the wildness we expect from mountains when we're used to seeing them close up, complicated and messy and full of broken edges. The word pyramid appeared in captions first, then in titles, then in entire threads dedicated to zooming, measuring, rotating, comparing. Soon, it wasn't just one triangle. People began pointing to multiple peaks, separated by miles each with a silhouette that seemed to echo the same geometry. And in the way these things tend to go online, the story didn't spread because it had been tested. It spread because it sat perfectly in that fragile space between what we know and what we want to be true. Within days, comment sections and forums buzzed. Videos multiplied. Someone posted coordinates. Someone else posted a map. A few people began drawing connecting lines looking for alignments. Familiar names surfaced like driftwood in a tide. Giza, Orion, Atlantis, ancient civilization. Not human. And then, almost inevitably, the counter voice arrived. Calm, patient, unimpressed. Geologists explained what they've explained for generations. Mountains can look triangular because glaciers carve them that way. Wind strips them. Freeze-thaw cycles fracture them. Ice presses and grinds and pulls rock into shapes that appear intentional at a distance. A pointed summit can be the leftover spine between multiple carved basins. A shadow can clean up a rough edge until the brain reads it as straight. There's even a term for peaks that pierce an ice sheet like this. Nunataks rock islands surrounded by frozen flow. They're common in polar regions. They're dramatic, and from far enough away, they can look like almost anything. To the trained eye, it was ordinary. To everyone else, it was irresistible. Because Antarctica has always functioned like a blank page at the bottom of the world. For centuries, it was the last unknown continent on maps, a place drawn as possibility more than place. And now, in an era when satellites can photograph every corner of Earth, that blank page seemed to be offering a new kind of tease. Not emptiness, but suggestion. Scientists can explain a shape, but imagination doesn't melt on command. People ask the question that drives nearly every legend humans have ever kept alive. What if? What if Antarctica wasn't always this way? What if there was a time before the ice claimed everything, when this land held something more than moss and microbes? What if, in a warmer epoch, someone stood here and built upward, the way humans have always built upward when they wanted to speak to the sky? Because that's the other thing that haunts the conversation. Pyramids, real ones, appear across the world. Different cultures, different centuries, different continents. Yet again and again, the same form rises from the ground. Wide base, narrowing sides, a point. A shape that feels both practical and symbolic, both stable and longing. You can argue correctly that it's physics, that a pyramid is what you get when you stack stone and fight gravity without modern materials. But the mind still wants connection. The mind still wants a thread. And if a shape that resembles a pyramid appears in the farthest, coldest corner of the planet, if it appears where no one expects it, then the imagination begins to lean forward like someone hearing their name whispered in a crowded room. Still, the truth is colder and more complicated than any clean story. Antarctica is not an easy place to verify anything. The weather turns aircraft back. The wind erases tracks. The cold punishes metal and skin alike. The ice itself moves, cracks, shifts, and creeps, an entire continent of slow motion that doesn't care what we believe. Even now, only a fraction of the surface has been studied up close in detail. Under the ice are mountains taller than the Alps, valleys deeper than intuition, rivers that never see sunlight, and lakes sealed away for ages that make human history look like a blink. To investigate any specific formation on foot isn't just expensive. It's dangerous in the kind of way that doesn't show up in online debates, the kind where a single mistake becomes permanent. So for now, the mystery remains. how should we put it, pixel deep. And yet, the fascination endures. Because even if these dark peaks are only rock shaped by time, the idea of what might lie beneath them stirs something old in us. The suspicion that we are not the first. That Earth has forgotten stories too vast, too fragile, or too inconvenient to remain on the surface. Civilizations rising, falling, vanishing beneath sand or sea or ice. It's a story as old as storytelling, and every new image, every strange angle, every uncanny shadow gives that story another heartbeat. Imagine standing near one of those peaks, whether pyramid or mountain, close enough to see the grain of the rock, close enough to feel how brutally the air steals heat. The cold would not feel like winter. It would feel like a material, like breathing into glass, into. The sun might hang in the sky without setting, circling slowly, casting shadows that stretch and tighten and rotate like hands on a clock no one can read. Around you, ice would extend in every direction, glittering not with warmth, but with hardness. There would be no scent of soil, no bird calls, no leaf movement, only the faint complaint of shifting glaciers and the occasional crack that sounds like the continent adjusting its posture. In that silence, perception becomes vulnerable, and it's easy, almost natural, to feel that the landscape is deliberate, that the angles mean something, that the dark peak is not simply exposed stone, but a marker, a monument, a memory that refused to be buried entirely. And then, the scientific story returns, as it always does, and it deserves its place. The peaks most commonly referenced in these discussions sit near the Ellsworth Mountains, a range shaped by tectonic collision and uplift, then carved by ice over immense stretches of time. Glaciers can sculpt ridges and faces into sharp geometry. Light and shadow can exaggerate that geometry until the eye sees clean edges where the ground is actually rough. A wall can be a ridge. A corner can be intersecting slopes. A perfect face can be a trick of contrast. Geology is capable of manufacturing symmetry the way wind is capable of manufacturing music. Not intentionally, but inevitably, given enough time. But humans rarely fall in love with inevitability. We fall in love with mystery. A mountain becomes a pyramid because the word pyramid hums with history. It implies builders, purpose, alignments. It suggests mind behind matter, and the more remote the place, the faster imagination runs, because remote places still feel like the last remaining stage for the impossible. How many places on Earth are left where we haven't already named every ridge, explained every formation, catalogued every anomaly? Antarctica is one of them, and the human mind cannot resist turning frontiers into stories. In many ways, the legend of Antarctic pyramids says less about what lies under the ice and more about what lies inside us, our desire for continuity, our refusal to accept that some parts of history may be empty, and our longing to believe the planet is holding something back, something that would reframe who we are. Because when we stare into that white void, we're often searching not for stone structures, but for an origin story that connects scattered civilizations, lost languages, and the questions we keep asking no matter how much we learn. Where did we come from? How long have we really been here? And what else has the Earth watched rise and disappear while we weren't looking? Scientists, meanwhile, continue their quieter work elsewhere, on the continent drilling cores, studying trapped air, reading climate history layer by layer. Their discoveries are not monuments, but they are astonishing in their own way. Ancient volcanic ash, dust from distant deserts, microorganisms that slept through millennia, chemical fingerprints of atmospheres long gone. The Earth remembers everything, even when we don't. And perhaps that is the deeper allure of this frozen mystery, not the promise of pyramids, but the certainty that beneath the ice, there are stories we haven't learned how to read yet. If someday explorers reach those dark peaks and find nothing but rock, some people will sigh, others will smile, but the mystery won't vanish. Because what we're searching for isn't only a structure, it's the feeling that there is still more to know, more to uncover, more to imagine. Satellites will keep orbiting, data will keep arriving, the ice will keep doing what it has always done, hiding, shaping, preserving, whispering. Antarctica doesn't need to remember us. It has survived every era, every climate, every species that arrived and disappeared. It is the oldest storyteller on Earth, and it doesn't require words. When we look at that frozen expanse, we're listening to something vast and ancient humming under our small, curious lives. And tonight, we're going to keep listening. Because somewhere between mountains and myth, the whisper beneath the ice is still there, quiet, patient, and just out of reach. If you've ever watched a mystery form in real time, you know it rarely arrives with drama. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets or carved stone doors sliding open. It shows up the way fog shows up quietly, with softened edges, until you realize you've been standing inside it for a while. That's what happened with Antarctica's pyramids. One day, they were just a few angular shapes in a polar satellite pass. The next, they were a shared obsession. People who had never looked at a topographic map in their life were suddenly learning how shadows stretch at high latitudes, how ice flows, how mountains are named, how coordinates work. They were zooming and rotating images until pixels became certainty. That part, at least, was real. The way an idea can pull attention into focus. And when attention gathers, it starts doing what attention always does. It searches for connection. Not long after those early images began to circulate, the conversation expanded the way it always does online. Outward and backward at the same time. Outward into larger claims, hidden cities, ancient builders, outsiders from the stars, and backward into older stories that already carried the same rhythm. Atlantis, Lemuria, a lost mother culture, suppressed expeditions, secret tunnels, maps copied from maps copied from maps, all pointing towards something that had supposedly been waiting under ice, unbothered by centuries of disbelief. The details differed depending on who was speaking, but the emotional shape stayed consistent. The Earth had a secret. Antarctica was the lock, and those angular peaks were the keyhole, just wide enough for the imagination to peer through. It's important, though, to notice something gentle and human here. Most people weren't drawn in because they wanted to reject science. They were drawn in because they wanted the world to feel deeper than the daily news cycle. They wanted a corner of the planet that still belonged to mystery. In an era where nearly everything is photographed and tagged and explained, Antarctica remains one of the few places that can still say, without words, "You don't know me yet." So the theories multiplied. Some were extravagant, some were careful and restrained, almost apologetic people saying, "I know it's probably just geology, but look at that angle." That "but" matters. It's the hinge where wonder lives. Geologists, meanwhile, responded the way they tend to respond, with patience and vocabulary that sounds like poetry if you let it. They talked about glacial carving and intersecting cirques. They talked about horns and arêtes, ridges sharpened by ice from multiple sides. They explained that a mountain can look like a pyramid not because it was built, but because glaciers behave like slow machines, grinding away at rock until it becomes an efficient shape. They mentioned a term that most people had never heard before, but that suddenly became a kind of spell in these discussions. Nunatak. A nunatak is a peak that rises above an ice sheet like an island above the sea. It's not necessarily special in itself. It's simply what remains visible when everything else is covered. And yet that's exactly what made these peaks so powerful as symbols. In a landscape engineered by nature to hide its own history, a nunatak feels like a clue. It feels like something that refused to be erased. It looks like the tip of an idea pushing through a surface that wants to keep everything smooth. There's also the matter of scale, something that gets lost easily when we stare at imagery without context. Some of the pyramids people pointed to were not temple-sized. They were mountain-sized. Many were measured in miles, not in yards. That doesn't make them impossible in a purely hypothetical sense. Earth has held larger monuments of stone than anything humans could ever carve, but it does make them unlikely to be human construction. Not because humans aren't clever, but because the energy required would be staggering, and the motive would need to be something far beyond anything we've ever seen in our own archaeological record. When you run into that kind of mismatch, the mind tries to solve it by changing the story. If it's too big for humans, then maybe it wasn't human. If it's too old for modern history, then maybe history is wrong. If it's too inaccessible to verify, then maybe that's the point. This is where Antarctica becomes uniquely persuasive as a setting for speculation. It's not just that it's remote, it's that it's remote in a way that feels intentional, as if the planet placed it there to keep certain things safe. But the planet doesn't plan like that. It doesn't hide with intention. It hides as a consequence of physics, geography, and time. Still, even physics can produce theater. At polar latitudes, sunlight behaves differently. Shadows stretch, sometimes absurdly. A small ridge can cast a long, dark blade across snow, sharpening the appearance of edges. A gentle slope can look like a sheer face when the contrast is high and the viewing angle is just right. And then there's the cold air itself. Antarctica can produce optical illusions so convincing that even experienced explorers have described them with a kind of embarrassed reverence. The atmosphere there can layer in temperatures cold, dense air near the surface, slightly warmer air above, creating refractive effects that bend light like a lens. Distant objects can appear lifted, stretched, or duplicated. Horizons can shimmer, mountains can seem closer than they are, or appear as ghost structures that drift away as you approach. Early expedition logs are full of these moments, not because those explorers were credulous, but because the environment is an expert at rewriting perception. And perception, especially in emptiness, is a hungry thing. It reaches. It invents. If you've ever stared into a dim room at night and thought you saw a figure in the corner, you know the feeling. Your brain is doing what brains do, filling in incomplete information with the safest possible guess. In Antarctica, the dim room is the entire continent, and the stakes feel larger because the place itself feels unreal. Now, to be fair, the people who were captivated by those satellite images didn't just rely on a single glance. They did what humans do when they're trying to make something true. They searched for patterns. They looked for alignments, triangles between peaks, ratios in distances, repetition in angles, echoes of famous sites elsewhere. The most commonly invoked comparison, of course, was Giza. A certain arrangement of 3 points has haunted human imagination for a long time, especially when it appears where we don't expect it. But here's the quiet truth. With enough points, you can draw meaningful shapes almost anywhere. This isn't an insult. It's a feature of human cognition. We are built to connect dots. We do it so effortlessly that we often don't realize we're doing it. A constellation is a perfect example. The stars we connect into Orion are not neighbors. They are scattered across vast depth, separated by distances our minds can't naturally hold. But from our point of view, the pattern looks coherent. So we name it. We build a story. We navigate by it. And then it becomes real in the cultural sense, even if it's not physically connected. Geographical pattern making works the same way. When you look at a continent and you want a triangle, you will find triangles. If you want alignments, you will find alignments. You can measure ratios until a coincidence starts to feel like a code. That doesn't mean everything is coincidence. It just means we have to be careful with the part of the mind that loves meaning more than it loves uncertainty. And Antarctica is uncertainty made visible. It is the one place on Earth that still feels like an unfinished sentence. Beneath the ice is a world so elaborate that even the best maps look like sketches. There are valleys buried under miles of ice. There are basins deep enough to hold seas. There are channels where water flows in darkness, lubricating the base of glaciers. There are volcanoes, some dormant, some active, warming the underside of the ice from below, creating meltwater systems that no sunlight ever touches. There is even an entire mountain range hidden under the East Antarctic ice sheet, the Subglacial Mountains. That discovery alone should be enough to humble anyone who thinks we already know this planet. Scientists didn't see the Gamburtsevs with eyes. They detected them with radar and seismic methods. They inferred their shape from echoes. The range is enormous, comparable in scale to major ranges we walk beside elsewhere, yet it has been sealed away under ice for so long that it might as well exist on another planet. And the Gamburtsevs raise their own questions. How did such a range form? How has it remained preserved? Why does its structure look so crisp in places where we would expect time to soften edges? In other words, Antarctica contains genuine mysteries that have nothing to do with pyramids. The continent's hidden landscape is dramatic. That part isn't debated, it's confirmed. What's debated is what we should do with that drama in our minds, because drama invites story, and story invites the kind of thinking that can be either a doorway to discovery or a trapdoor into certainty without evidence. Antarctica has hosted both. There's a reason modern myths attach to it so easily. Antarctica is a natural archive. Ice is one of the best preservers on Earth. Not forever. Nothing lasts forever, but long enough to keep secrets for astonishing spans of time. Ice can seal away biological material, chemical traces, atmospheric bubbles. It can protect meteorites from oxidation. It can store dust from distant deserts and ash from ancient eruptions like pages pressed in a book. When scientists drill ice cores, what they extract is not just frozen water. It's a time capsule. Each layer contains chemistry from the year it fell. Each bubble holds a sample of ancient atmosphere, like a breath captured in glass. These cores let us reconstruct climate history, temperature swings, carbon dioxide levels, methane changes, volcanic events, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. That's real. And it's also, if you think about it, profoundly haunting. Because it means the Earth really does keep memory, just not in the way we do. The ice remembers without intention. It preserves without narrative. But humans are narrative creatures. We can't help turning data into story. So when people hear Antarctica preserves things, the mind takes the next step. It asks, if it can preserve air, can it preserve artifacts? If it can preserve meteorites, can it preserve ruins? If it can preserve life in subglacial lakes, can it preserve evidence of a forgotten chapter? And then the imagination becomes a kind of heat, trying to melt through the barrier of uncertainty. This is where subglacial lakes enter the conversation like a second heartbeat. Beneath Antarctica's ice are hundreds of lakes, some small, some vast, sealed away from the surface. The most famous Lake Vostok sits under roughly 2.5 miles of ice. Scientists believe it has been isolated for hundreds of thousands of years, possibly longer. Its water remains liquid because of pressure and geothermal heat. When researchers drilled carefully near it, they found signs of microbial life. Tiny organisms adapted to darkness, pressure, and isolation. Life surviving in conditions we once would have called impossible. That fact alone changes how you see the world. If life can persist, they're sealed off from sunlight, from seasons, from the normal flow of ecology, then the planet is more inventive than we give it credit for. And once you accept that, the boundary between possible and imaginable shifts. Not in a reckless way, in a thoughtful way. It doesn't mean pyramids are hidden under the ice. It means the Earth is capable of preserving unexpected systems for longer than we instinctively understand. Nature itself becomes a keeper, and keepers always inspire stories. In the online mythos, these lakes sometimes become sanctuaries. People imagine tunnels connecting them, warm caverns lit by geothermal glow, entire ecosystems, sometimes even entire societies sheltered beneath. It's easy to dismiss those ideas, and in the literal sense, they aren't supported by evidence. But emotionally, they make a certain kind of sense. Humans want refuge stories. We want to believe there are places that survived the catastrophes that reshaped everything else. Antarctica, sealed and remote, becomes the perfect canvas for that longing. Then, geology steps in again, firm but not cruel. Geologists will tell you Antarctica was not recently warm in the way such myths require. The last time it hosted forests like those in our imaginations was tens of millions of years ago, long before humans existed. Fossils found there, pollen, wood, ancient plant material belong to epochs when dinosaurs still walked other parts of the planet, or when mammals were only beginning to diversify. Yes, Antarctica was once green. That part is real. But the timeline matters. The warmth that supported forests did not overlap with human civilization. It didn't overlap with humans at all. There have been warmer interglacial periods more recently, of course. Ice sheets expand and retreat. Coasts can be more or less exposed. But the deep interior, the place where those famous peaks sit, has been dominated by ice for far longer than any human record. So if there were ruins, we would expect to find some trace tools, metals, combustion signatures, soil disturbance, something that doesn't look like geology. And to date, we haven't. But the absence of evidence isn't emotionally satisfying, because it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a pause. And Antarctica specializes in pauses. It is a continent that holds stillness like a skill. Which brings us back to the peaks. Even if they're natural, why do they feel so compelling? Partly because they look like our own creations. A pyramid is not just a shape. It's a cultural signal. It whispers of builders and rites and alignments. It suggests intention, and intention suggests mind, and mind suggests we're not alone in history. A mountain, by contrast, suggests time without mind. It suggests forces that don't care what we think. And many people quietly deep down would rather live in a world where something cares. Not necessarily a god, not necessarily a conspiracy, just a world where the patterns mean something beyond physics. So when a mountain resembles a pyramid, it becomes a compromise between those desires. It looks like nature speaking in our language, even if it isn't. The irony is that geology, when you listen to it closely, is already a language. It's just slower than we are. Its grammar is pressure. Its verbs are erosion and uplift. Its punctuation is fault lines, ridges, and basins. Its metaphors are glaciers and volcanic heat. In Antarctica, that language is amplified. The continent is not only a place where geology is exposed, it's a place where geology is hidden so completely that every exposed fragment feels like a message. When you see a Nunatak, you're not just seeing rock. You're seeing the tip of an entire landscape buried beneath. It's like seeing a single word of a paragraph underwater and trying to reconstruct the story around it. Sometimes you can, often you can't. That uncertainty is fertile ground. And on fertile ground, myths grow. If you want to understand why the pyramid story endures, it helps to remember that the internet doesn't spread ideas the way libraries do. It spreads them the way weather does. A gust picks something up. It moves it. It drops it somewhere else where it gathers with other things until it becomes a drift. That drift becomes a community of attention, and community changes the feeling of an idea. Alone, a person might say, "That looks like a pyramid. Weird." In a group, the same person might say, "We found 3 pyramids and the coordinates match the Orion belt." The story becomes more confident because confidence is contagious. The images are ambiguous enough to support that confidence. Polar imagery is often low contrast, full of glare. Snow creates uniform surfaces, minor details vanish, edges appear cleaner than they are, shadows do the rest. But here's something else that keeps it alive. Antarctica is genuinely hard to access, so the story can't be easily closed. If someone posted a pyramid in Arizona, you could drive there and look. You could walk around it, measure it, photograph it, test the rock, scan it, and end the argument within a week. In Antarctica, you can't do that casually. Verification becomes a rare luxury, so the conversation stays open by default, and open conversations breed legends. Still, there is a kind of beauty in this, if we're honest. Not because the myth is true, but because the myth reveals how much people still want to look at the Earth with fresh eyes, how much they still want the planet to be mysterious, how much they still crave the feeling that something could be discovered that would rearrange their internal map of reality. That desire is not childish. It's the root of exploration. The challenge is learning how to hold that desire gently without forcing it into certainty, without turning longing into proof. Science asks us to stay in the discomfort of not yet. Myth invites us to leap to always. The healthiest curiosity lives between those two, and that's where we're walking tonight. Between the folds of science and speculation, between pixels and peaks, between what the ice reveals and what it keeps. Because even in the most cautious scientific view, Antarctica remains extraordinary. Under the ice are rivers that don't freeze in the way surface water does because they move under pressure, warmed by friction and geothermal heat. There are channels that carry water like veins, altering how glaciers slide. There are regions where heat from below makes the ice thinner than expected. There are ice streams, fast-moving corridors that behave like highways of frozen flow. The continent is not dead. It's dynamic in slow motion. And when you live in a world that moves slowly, you begin to appreciate the scale of patience. Mountains form over millions of years. Ice sheets grow and shift over hundreds of thousands. Lakes stay sealed for ages. The planet doesn't rush. So when we, with our quick minds and shorter lifespans, stare at a sharp triangle in the snow and feel a jolt of recognition, we're feeling a mismatch in timescales. Our minds are built for immediate causation. Someone made that, someone planned it, someone intended it. But Antarctica asks us to imagine causation without intention form, without design. Beauty without a builder. That's a difficult ask because it challenges the way we assign meaning. And yet, it's also soothing if you let it be, because it means the planet can create wonders on its own, that it doesn't need us to be impressive. It also means that even if there are no pyramids under the ice, there are still things under the ice that deserve reverence. Things older than our stories. Consider the ice cores again. Inside them are records of climate swings, ice ages, and warmer interludes, revealing that Earth's climate can change abruptly. Not always, but sometimes. There are rapid shifts recorded in chemical signatures, changes in temperature and atmospheric composition that occurred within decades. That's not a myth, that's data. And it carries a different kind of awe. Not the awe of hidden builders, but the awe of a planet that can turn quickly when certain thresholds are crossed. When you realize that, the legends of lost civilizations start to feel less like entertainment and more like metaphor. Not because Atlantis was real, but because the idea of a society undone by sudden environmental change is not far-fetched at all. We have evidence of human cultures disrupted by droughts, floods, and shifting seas even within the last few thousand years. The Earth doesn't need to hide pyramids to be unsettling. It only needs to keep doing what it has always done. Change. Antarctica is a reminder of that change made visible in its most extreme form, a continent transformed into a frozen archive. And archives, by their nature, invite interpretation. The temptation is to read the archive as if it were written for us, to imagine that what's preserved is preserved with purpose, that the ice is guarding answers like a vault. But ice is not a guardian. It is a medium. It stores because it is cold. It seals because it accumulates. It preserves because it slows decay. That's all, and that's enough. Because it means the planet has been keeping records long before we knew how to ask questions. So what do we do with the peaks? We do what careful curiosity does. We hold two truths at once. 1. The pyramids most likely are natural mountains shaped by glaciers, wind, and time. 2. The fact that they can look so geometric from space is itself a lesson in how nature and perception collaborate to create meaning. And maybe there's a third truth, quieter than the other two. 3. Even if the pyramids aren't real, the longing behind the story is real, and it points towards something valuable in us. Because the story persists, not because the evidence is strong, but because it offers a feeling that Earth is still capable of surprising us, that there are still places we haven't fully measured, that not everything has been reduced to a caption. In an age where information arrives faster than we can digest it, that feeling is rare. And Antarctica, with its endless white and hidden black, delivers it almost effortlessly. If you close your eyes for a moment, you can picture how the whole thing starts for someone. A late night, a screen glow, a photograph of a dark triangle rising from ice. For a heartbeat, it looks like a monument. Then the mind leans in. The mind wants it to be true. Not because it hates reality, but because it loves depth. Because it wants the Earth to have more layers than the ones we walk on. And in Antarctica, the Earth actually does. Miles of layers. So tonight, as we keep drifting along this line between geology and dream, we can let the story do what it does best. Not convince us, not recruit us, just invite us to look longer than usual, to notice how quickly the brain turns shadow into structure, to notice how the planet turns chaos into symmetry, to notice how the ice holds history in silence, whether that history is volcanic ash, ancient air, or simply the slow sculpting of rock into shapes that resemble our oldest monuments. And maybe that's the most honest version of the Antarctic pyramid story. A reminder that mystery doesn't always mean something is hidden. Sometimes mystery means we're finally paying attention. Sometimes it means we're seeing the Earth as strange again. And sometimes, in the coldest place on the planet, that strangeness feels like comfort, because it tells us the world is bigger than our explanations. And if the world is bigger than our explanations, then our questions still have somewhere to go. In part 3, we'll move deeper beneath the surface into the genuinely hidden Antarctica, the buried topography, the moving ice, the subglacial water systems, and the way scientific tools see what the eye never can. We'll also trace why certain geometric illusions appear so convincing from orbit, and how the continent's slow motion creates the perfect conditions for legends to keep reforming like snowdrifts. The whisper beneath the ice doesn't get louder, it gets clearer. And clarity in Antarctica is its own kind of mystery. If you've been following the echo of this story into deeper snow, you know by now. Antarctica is a kind of paradox. The closer science looks, the richer the mystery grows, just not always in the direction we expect. So, let's slip past the surface now. Let's go below. Beneath the ceiling of white, a hidden world unfolds, far stranger than any myth, yet so real it calibrates the whole planet's climate and memory. Picture slicing through Antarctica's ice, layer by slow layer. After passing the compacted histories of snow, ash, and air, you reach a landscape so untouched it feels like the negative of a mountain range, an imprint, a shadow world sealed in silence for millions of years. The story of mapping this under-ice kingdom is itself a story worth lingering on. In the mid-20th century, explorers brought seismic gear and radar to these blank spaces. At first, they expected only a rough, featureless bedrock. But as the data returned, the shapes became unmistakable. There were valleys carved deeper than any in Europe, peaks and ridges that rose and fell in patterns as wild and grand as any range above ground. Nowhere is this underground drama more startling than in the Gamburtsev subglacial mountains. Stretching for hundreds of miles, their sharp summits have never seen a ray of sunlight. They are older than the East Antarctic ice sheet covering them, possibly older even than the final separation of Earth's continents in their long, slow dance. In shape and scale, they resemble the Alps, except instead of snow-peaked glory above treeline, they sleep under 2 or 3 miles of solid ice. What is a mountain when it's been hidden for so long? Some ridges here almost certainly mimic the outlines that the curious have seen from space, a foundation for the pyramid legends. And in a sense, every buried peak is a real pyramid, shaped by the mechanics of glaciers, refined by patience. Their lines crisp, where ice presses in and dust has darkened what little face gets close to the surface. Now, imagine seeing all this, not with your eyes, but with antennas, pressure sensors, or satellites. Scientists use ground-penetrating radar to send signals deep into the ice, mapping echoes that bounce back, hinting at stone, water, hollows. The results are often surreal, irregular shadows line up into mathematical contours. Valleys become threads, hidden subglacial lakes wink out of nowhere, sending signals as crisp as a drumbeat. To experienced geoscientists, a perfect triangle in these maps is like a clever joke told by erosion and pressure. But as every good story reminds us, even experts have moments where the data makes them stop. "That's odd," they'll mutter, staring at the screen. Not because they think the hand of an ancient architect shaped what they see, but because chaos in nature sometimes folds itself so neatly it seems deliberate. The psychology of pattern. This is where Antarctica becomes as much a psychological landscape as a geographic one. Human brains are hardwired to recognize patterns, faces, and clouds, stories and stars, geometry and randomness. This tendency, called pareidolia, may once have kept our ancestors alive. When you mistake a stick for a snake, you're more likely to survive than if you ignore a real threat. So our minds err on the side of perception, weaving shape and meaning out of noise. It's no accident that explorers, staring into emptiness, start seeing not only triangles but hints of fortresses, towers, entire ruins that recede as you move closer. Combine that with deep isolation, endless days or nights, and the strange colors of Antarctica blues and greens pressed into compacted ice, the black gleam of wind-polished rock, the silver shimmer of frozen fog. And you get a landscape that encourages the mind to reach further than usual for meaning. Above all, the feature that most defines Antarctica isn't its cold or its size, it's its time. This continent functions on a timescale that exceeds easy storytelling. For a human, a year is long. For Antarctica, a year is a moment. Ice can move a continent's worth of water from one coast to another, not in days or centuries, but in the incredibly slow pacing of hundreds of thousands of years. Yet, even within that vastness, the environment is always in motion. The East Antarctic ice sheet moves outward as new snow falls and compacts. Glaciers descend through mountain valleys, grinding, sculpting, sometimes splitting off to form cliffs at the edge of the continent. Some glaciers move so slowly they seem still. Others surge under their own weight, crashing into the Southern Ocean with the force of many Hiroshimas. Within the ice are long depressions, gaps, tunnels, even whole lakes, which never freeze solid despite the cold above. In places like Lake Vostok, microbial life persists. Not colorful or complex, but alive, surviving off chemistry alone, sealed from the sky for what could be hundreds of thousands of years. If you want proof that Antarctica's deepest gift is memory, look at the ice cores. To drill an ice core is to cut a timeline into a substance older than civilization. Scientists analyze bubbles trapped deep below, each bubble a breath of an atmosphere from long ago, still pure, untouched by the engines of any age. They measure the ratios of carbon dioxide, methane, and oxygen. In every slender, compressed section, there's the afterimage of fires, the echo of deserts, the chemical fingerprint of faraway volcanoes. Sometimes the record tells of peace, centuries of calm, regular snowfall, predictable seasons. Sometimes it tells of trauma, sudden jumps in greenhouse gases, sharp lines of black showing distant eruptions, layers where dust thickens, proof of cold winds sweeping barren steppes. No myth goes deeper than this form of memory, one that predates myth itself. One of the things the ice teaches, if you listen, is patience. The peaks that poke through the snow are persistent in a way life rarely is. Nunataks stand unchanged for tens of millions of years, sometimes longer. The minerals in their rock have seen forests rise and vanish, seas grow and shrink. Birds evolve from reptiles and relearn the air over and over. Some of these rocks have been weathered so long that bacteria and fungi have moved in a hint of color, a dusting of resilient life on the otherwise black stone. These living films darken the Nunataks, making their shapes even more striking when viewed from above. It is both ordinary and profound. Simple life forms, clinging to stone, marking time while worlds turn to ice around them. Why is it then that people want so badly to imagine pyramids, cities, even messages beneath the ice? The answer, as always, is partly practical and partly poetic. Symmetry is efficient. Triangles shed wind. Pyramids last. If you're building for eternity, you surrender to these forms. Ancient humans figured this out everywhere gravity pressed downward and materials were weak. It's no wonder the same shape appears around the globe. But for us, living in an age of artificial symmetry, digital perfection, and endless repetition stumbling across a perfect triangle in nature feels like hearing your name in static. It feels intentional, personal, uncanny. In Antarctica, where randomness rules, the rare order of a geometric peak is more shocking than a face in the clouds. It invites not just attention, but longing. Longing for connection, for story, for participation in something older than history. And then there's the fact that most of us see the pyramids as pixels, not as peaks. The satellites that photograph Antarctica are magnificent machines of precision. But every camera transforms the world. Every sensor has quirks. A ridge that looks like a straight line from 600 miles up might be jagged rubble underfoot. A shadow can disguise a slope. A slight tilt in the satellite's orbit can stretch features into cleaner shapes than actually exist. Add to this the process of algorithmic image interpretation, with software balancing contrast, sharpening lines, colorizing features for visibility, and you can see how it's easy for a mountain to turn into a monument, or, in the other direction, for an extraordinary ancient ruin to go unnoticed as just another bump in the ice. In other words, we see what we're prepared to see. And technology, while brilliant, amplifies our own pattern-hunting instincts. There's a poetic irony in all this. The more thorough our science becomes, the further we peer beneath Antarctica's ice, the more questions small and vast bubble up. With each new satellite map, another shape emerges, another alignment forms, another theoretical thread is spun into the collective web. The myth itself becomes self-renewing. And Antarctica, patient as always, allows this. The ice flows, the stone persists, the wind carries on, and humans keep returning with stories. Let's pull back a moment now. Picture the wind gliding across continent-wide plains. There's so little to slow it down that it can travel at hurricane force without wave or forest to resist. The polar air is so dry, sound travels differently, subdued, sharp, and rare. Stand outside a research base, and you'll hear almost nothing. Mechanical noises are swallowed. Even footsteps vanish quickly. Your own breath sounds loud in your ears. Within that silence, the mind can invent a presence, a sense that the environment itself is conscious, waiting. But the stillness is not absence. It is a form of listening. The wind works on the land, brushing away loose snow, revealing black rock here, concealing a slope there. The same face can look unrecognizable day by day, depending on the wind's last command. In this way, Antarctica seems to communicate with no message except duration. It's in this space, the sound between stories, that the whisper beneath the ice truly lives. A message not from lost civilizations, but from the world itself. Everything endures change. Everything leaves a pattern, however faint. Nothing is final, but nothing is ever fully lost. To step back and look at Antarctica as an archive is to see how the planet stores memory and substance. Each new snow adds a layer, trapping dust, gas, life, and the record of every event the sky delivered. The ice preserves. The rock beneath shifts, but does not forget. In the deep shadow of buried mountains, even memories not meant for us remain, waiting for the sun to return with warmth thousands or millions of years from now. Science is the careful unlocking of this archive. Geologists, chemists, biologists, glaciologists, each turns the page as gently as possible. Knowing a page lost can never be rewritten. Every careful core, every spectral scan, every measurement from a sensor on a lonely ridge contributes to a tapestry whose full design we may never see. And that's all right. It's tempting for those who trade only in numbers to brush aside wonder, as if it were dangerous to rationality. But the longing for hidden worlds, the thrill at each new question, is how discovery survives skepticism. It's what led explorers to both fail and succeed, to return home with stories of new islands or simply more ice. If you sense, while listening, a tension, a low hum between facts and dreams, between what we know and what we hope, you are hearing the real music of Antarctic mystery. The pyramids in the snow matter not because of what they are, but because of what they represent. The possibility that some places on Earth remain unmeasured, unspoiled by certainty, still large enough to house secrets. We need those places, not to keep myths alive, but to keep ourselves open to awe. So, as this quiet journey rounds its midpoint, let's let the myth rest a moment. Let the peaks, Nunataks, and valleys resume being simply what they are. The persistent punctuation marks of a landscape slower than memory, but quicker than stone. Let the satellites keep their patient vigil, orbiting over the same fields, catching new angles as years pass. Let the researchers work their drills and sensors into the old secrets, gathering each new answer as a gift, not as a guarantee. And let us, listeners from places far from the ice, keep wondering, not frantically, not impatiently, but steadily, in a kind of restful readiness for what the world might still show us. In the next part, we'll explore what those who live and work on the continent experience, the rhythms that govern life at the edge of the world, the psychological effects of silence and distance, and how even among the best instruments, the human mind remains the tool most tuned to mystery. We'll also see how the myths themselves change with every new generation, and why, far from fading, they may become more important as the rest of the world grows noisier and less patient with the unknown. And always, the whisper beneath the ice grows more present, not as a solution, but as an invitation. So as the wind continues across the white, shaping, hiding, and revealing, we remember. The whisper was here before us. It will be here long after. But for now, in this quiet moment, it is ours to follow. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the daily rhythms of life perched at the edge of all that white. The scientists who call Antarctica home for months at a time exist on a timetable dictated not by the clock, but by the slow spin of the planet. In the long daylight of austral summer, the sun never fully sets. It circles overhead in a luminous arc, bending the sense of time until day and night dissolve into each other. In winter, that same sun disappears completely, plunging the land into unbroken darkness, the only light a cold wash of stars over the horizon, or the wavering glow of the aurora, shifting green and violet curtains rippling silently above endless snow. Within their stations, researchers keep to schedules out of necessity, but outside, the world ignores their rituals. Even the weather has its own kind of autonomy, answering only to the shifting moods of the wind, the flow of clouds, and the invisible pressures that send blizzards racing in without warning. The pressure doors rattle, heaters hum, and thick walls keep the air inside bearable. Beyond those fragile boundaries, the only safe envelope for hundreds of miles. Temperature and silence reign, and every human presence feels almost borrowed. Stepping into that stillness changes a person. The mind, so used to external stimulus and the busy negotiation of crowded spaces, quiets itself in response to the vastness. The loudest sound becomes the crunch of boots on compacted snow, each step muffled by the open landscape, each breath immediately visible condensing into brief clouds that vanish in a moment. The body adjusts, the senses recalibrate, and out in the cold, some describe feeling transparent, as if they themselves are being erased by the scale of the land. In such an environment, perception can become heightened and strangely malleable. Without the cues of cities or forests, without even a horizon that changes, the eye begins to project familiar forms into the abstract. A distant ridge becomes not just a line, but something loaded with intent. A shadow stretches across a glacier, and for an instant, it's not just snow, but the unspoken edge of a structure. The mind, searching for meaning and story, weaves patterns to fill the void. This effect isn't limited to those standing among the ice. People at home, poring over satellite images on their screens, are unknowingly vulnerable to the same impulses. A glitch in the pixel grid becomes a doorway. 3 peaks in just the right arrangement become a plan. The repetition of these images across forums and media magnifies suggestiveness. What was once an isolated thought becomes a kind of shared vision. This is how legends propagate not as lies, but as reflections of our deep need for connection and narrative. But even for those with nothing to prove, Antarctica offers an education like no other. It teaches the value of patience in a world obsessed with immediacy. Geologists, seismologists, meteorologists, each learns that the results they seek might come only over years or even lifetimes, and that much of the most valuable data will simply be noise, awaiting the rare signal. Biologists collect samples, knowing that the rare microbes they isolate could change our understanding of adaptation, or hint at life forms that might one day be found beneath the ice crust of distant moons. In the rare moments when the wind dies and the air is perfectly still, there's a different kind of learning. Some scientists describe a sensation that's hard to translate, an interior silence, as if their thoughts slow to match the measured pulse of the continent itself. The solitude is profound, but not lonely. With every long night, every slow sunrise, the vastness feels less empty and more alive in its own silent way. Legends still find their way even here. Among crews, there are whispered jokes about the ghosts of explorers who never returned, about the hidden things that might watch from the edge of a field of view, or about the ice remembering every step taken upon it. Whether in jest or in awe, these stories are not just entertainment. They are a way to place oneself in a lineage, to feel briefly connected to the ongoing mystery of being small in a place so large. The land itself is anything but unchanging. The ice moves, staggering in its slowness, grinding beneath its own enormous weight. Creaks and groans echo through the dark, sometimes powerful enough to be felt through layers of boots and snow. Towers of blue ice lean and collapse, glaciers fracture, and even the sharpest peak is slowly, persistently altered by wind, sun, and the uneasy motion of the continent's heart. Over vast stretches of time, what seems permanent is slowly being unmade and remade. For all the technology now deployed, drones, satellites, ice-penetrating radar, sensors sending back streams of measurements, there remains the feeling that some secrets are content to wait. Some landscapes under the ice have never been seen, only inferred. Some anomalies in radar data still defy quick explanation, lingering at the edge of understanding, invitations for the next generation of explorers to look again, to question once more. The patience of stone is matched only by the patience of those driven by wonder. This is perhaps the real legacy of the Antarctic myth, not just the story of what might be buried, but the persistent sense that something worth discovering remains. It's the rare place on Earth where not knowing is expected, embraced, even revered. Each year, new measurements add a detail to the map. Each image captured adds another layer to the archive. And with each new answer, fresh questions emerge, proving that certainty is as elusive as the horizon here. Always present, always receding. When you step away from the data, when the spreadsheets and graphs are set aside, the experience of the continent endures in memory. There are colors in the snow one never forgets. A blue so deep it feels like a portal, pink and gold painted across the sky at midnight. Halos around the sun cast by ice crystals in the upper air. There's the scent of the wind carrying nothing but itself. There's the feeling of standing in a place so vast and indifferent that one's own worries melt away, replaced by the rarest gift, a kind of peace. Yet even at peace, curiosity persists. The question lingers, perhaps even more powerfully when answers fall away. What is it that endures beneath the moving ice? What records, what relics, what stories are pressed into the rock, waiting for another era of warmth? If pyramids are not hidden, what is? And if nothing of human design lies under the snow, what of the planet itself? What does it promise and what does it remember that we have yet to dream? There's comfort in the idea that the world's last silences, far from empty, are saturated with potential. In the long epochs of night, as wind brushes against the foundations of ancient peaks, the Earth's own memory is being rewritten, word by word, in the archive of ice and stone. And somewhere, generations from now, another watcher will stand under these same stars, knees in the cold, breath clouding the air, listening for the faint echo that has traveled across centuries. Perhaps they will have more answers. Perhaps not. But they will almost certainly have the same questions, the same longing to find familiar patterns, to understand the rhythm of change, and to marvel at the endurance of wonder in a world that keeps remaking itself. So for now, we listen. We wait. The shapes in the snow, the shadows in the data, the stories that cross the frozen plain, they all remain. Unfinished, enduring, speaking softly to anyone ready to hear. And in the emptiness, the planet keeps its quiet watch, recording everything, promising nothing, sustaining the kind of mystery that invites us to belong, if only for a little while, to its endless archive of becoming. The whisper beneath the ice is not a summons to solve, but an invitation to wonder. And that is enough. Every return to Antarctica's story is a kind of restart, as if the land itself resets your perspective, placing you once more at the threshold of the unknown. This is, perhaps, why legends never tire here. Each season, each image brought down from the satellites or sent back by drones renews the old questions and pulls fresh eyes into the centuries-old habit of seeing significance in shadow and line. Consider for a moment how the first cartographers drew the bottom of the world. Before Antarctica was mapped, it was the great white continent of speculation terra australis incognita. Its silhouette changed with each new map, growing and shrinking as rumors spread, until finally, with exploration and aerial reconnaissance, the shape of the continent settled, but its secrets only deepened. The edge of the map, once labeled only with dragons and possibility, is now charted with coordinates, but the interior, especially under the ice, remains stripped of certainty. Among researchers, there's respect for this tension. Veteran scientists know that each answer comes with a shadow attached, a margin of error, a data gap, a hypothesis that might collapse with the next drill sample. Expeditions are planned not just for discovery, but for humility. Even at the cutting edge, a sense of unfinished business lingers. You can analyze air bubbles that last saw sunlight when mammoths walked northern forests, but the next meter of ice core may yet surprise. Each seismic rumble, each echo that returns from beneath the sheet, hints at complexities and voids no sonde has yet revealed. Now imagine living day to day in such an environment, surrounded by purpose and uncertainty in equal measure. Each practical task, clearing an antenna, calibrating instruments, testing for contamination in a water sample, unfolds under skies that refuse to change. The body adapts, but the mind is always half distracted, tuning in to a planet that hums at a frequency outside of speech. Conversations among those overwintering are a study in contrast. Weekends can swing from technical debates about magnetic anomalies to philosophical speculation about the fate of the universe. Jokes run dry and dark. Friendships are forged on shared silences. Walks around the base where 100 steps in any direction are enough to make you vanish into white. A brief memory against the static of the landscape. Out there, space feels close but empty. The brain is busy, but the world gives nothing back. A mirror held up to your own perceptions, your hunger for explanation. This is fertile ground for narrative, for glimpses in the periphery. A sharp ridge in the distance that becomes for a moment a wall. A pattern in the ice that lines up with the sun, hinting at something drawn, not random. Here, a different kind of time creeps in. One that doesn't flow, but pools in the corners of waiting and watching. The days collapse together under the perpetual sun of summer and lose all definition in the months-long night. In that prolonged dusk or darkness, memory shifts. You become less certain not only of what is possible in the landscape, but of where you fit inside it. In such a place, the story of hidden pyramids is less a question of belief and more a study of longing. To long is to live outside the present, to extend yourself into shapes unseen and stories unfinished. Myths about lost cities, about ancient messages carved in geometry for future discovery, are not suspensions of reason. They are acts of reaching, of yearning to share the stage with whatever came before and whatever will remain long after. This is why, year after year, new faces return to the continent, drawn less by what they already know than by what they hope might be waiting. To be cold and small and unhurried in such a space is to recognize your own limits and your own desires. Some come for data, some for the adventure, some for the feeling that comes only when mystery brushes close by. No one returns unchanged. If you ask around after months in that slow, sideways world, what most people say they remember is not the extremity of cold or work, but the sudden, ephemeral signs of life. A flock of petrels arcing through storm-bright light, the gold glint of the sundogs as crystals catch low sunlight, a distant line of penguins vanishing into a haze. Even in the depth of ice, the planet asserts itself as vital, impossible to mute, both secretive and generous. Standing at the edge of a windswept plateau, you can feel the play between knowledge and wonder. The science remains patient and open, even as myth rearranges itself, taking on the contours of each new uncertainty. A new anomaly in a scan becomes tomorrow's theory. A tale repeated at dinner grows into shared folklore, not because anyone is deceived, but because everyone is, in some sense, participating in the same project-making meaning in the face of immensity, anchoring the mind in the only way it knows how. And the land allows this. The continent is not changed by your interpretations, only weathered by your presence. Every story, true or fabulous, evaporates into the cold, joining the others that drift forever above the endless snow. All the while, the world below the surface is still writing and rewriting its own silent epic. Glaciers continue their slow, grinding conversations with the past and future. Air bubbles record the shifting taste of the atmosphere. The black shapes beneath the snow keep rising and subsiding, moving the legends as easily as the ice itself moves continents. Nothing is still, not even silence. So as scientists chart new territory, as skeptics and dreamers argue online, as legends and data circulate together in a whirl of pixels and soundbites, Antarctica remains, unbothered, unhurried, both a world of facts and the most fertile ground for questions. There are places on Earth so strange that merely describing them is a form of myth-making. Antarctica, more than most, welcomes that contradiction. It is real and imagined, observed and invented, all at once, a canvas still being drawn. If you find yourself lulled by that knowledge, as many who listen do, you are not alone. It is the privilege of our age to dwell for a moment in the pause between knowing and dreaming, feeling the ancient, patient land beneath us, answering our questions by simply enduring them. All that is required is to listen quietly, gently, trusting that not every whisper must resolve itself into meaning. Some are there just to remind us how rare it is and how necessary to be at the edge of an unsolved world. There's an odd, beautiful comfort in knowing that the greatest questions about Antarctica aren't likely to find their final answers anytime soon. Instead, each layer we peel back reveals an older mystery turned sideways, or a new version of the same familiar longing. Who were the first to dream here? What vanished epochs lie below our reach? In such a place, even certainty feels patient and unfinished, like the pale sun never quite dipping below the horizon. This is what makes the legend of Antarctic pyramids so enduring. Whether seen in a photo feed, on a blurry map, or through the frost-streaked window of a field hut, these shapes persist as invitations. They signal that loss and preservation are not opposites, but partners. They teach us that the world's oldest stories are partly told in what remains accessible, and partly held in what eludes us from the reach of shovels, from the sight lines of satellites, or merely from the full clarity of human imagination. Every effort to probe further, the export of seismic waves into hidden valleys, the careful lowering of drills through ancient snowfields, the programming of new instruments to trace faint magnetic signatures is an act of partnership as much as conquest. Scientists here do not command the land, they negotiate with it. Progress is measured in centimeters, in gigabytes sifted, in small moments of clarity between long stretches of white noise and waiting. And still, the ice offers up treasures on its own terms. There are moments when a core sample reveals a speck of volcanic ash, a dusting of pollen, a trace of sea salt from an epoch when the ocean breathed across what is now a desert of silence. These clues, humble as they are, expand the scale of memory. Fossilized wood from an ancient forest, a crystal matrix altered by warmth and then welded shut by the coming of cold, each holds a flash of the world's old warmth, as if the past is stubbornly signaling its presence to the future. Even the science that anchors the present is a dance with uncertainty. Sometimes a strange signal in a radargram hints at a cavern or channel below, and weeks of analysis follow, until at last, the mind accepts it as a pocket of air, a seam of ancient water, nothing more. But the next scan may show something different, something that demands the map be redrawn or the story retold. This cycle is not a failure of understanding, it is the essence of what makes Antarctica alive in our imaginations. Certainty trembles here, as it does in the presence of anything too large to hold all at once. It is unsettling and freeing at the same time, a nudge to let go, to accept that some archives yield their records only a page at a time, that in the slow breathing of ice and stone are patterns no single observer will ever fully follow. Outside, the weather keeps scripting its own truths. One day, a storm paints every ridge and hollow with the same raw palette, making the contours of the land dissolve into abstraction. The next, bitter sun reveals sharp blue ice at the base of each black mountain, the shadows as sharp as obsidian blades. The geography that seems absolute from above, pyramidal peaks, ridges, valleys as straight as lines drawn by an architect's hand, is constantly undone, rewritten by drift and thaw, the wind's daily tedium. Within this shifting environment, human memory bends as well. The mind will fill gaps in recollection with myths, if not with maps. It will connect a line of 3 peaks into a triangle reminiscent of home, or divine a sense of intention from a symmetry that is only the echo of old glaciers changing direction. It is only natural that the mind, meeting such vast indifference, wants the world to gesture back, wants to imagine the cold holding signs and symbols left for us. But the Antarctic archive is too old and too immense for such neat reciprocities. What it gives obliquely, through ambiguous shapes and ambiguous silences. It reminds us that we are participants, not directors, that to stand here is to join the story, not to finish it. Still, there is always the hope that the next season will deliver something unmistakable, that a new fault in the ice will uncover a relic of the living past, that a signal picked up by a future probe will rewrite the narrative's beginning or end. Season after season, the hope repeats itself as naturally as the cycle of thaw and freeze, fulfilling our appetite for surprise or for continuity in ways as mysterious as the land itself. And so, wonder refuses to freeze. It adapts, as life always does, to the cold, to the light, to the passage of untold time. The legend of the Antarctic pyramids lives on, not because no answer exists, but because the world remains generous with questions. Because every myth, like every snowflake falling on the old ice, is a small, necessary addition to a more lasting record. The record of why we look, There will always be another shadow risen on a satellite screen, another glint in the mind's eye hinting at lost patterns and older worlds. There will always be new stories, new science, new echoes under the ice. And so we wait with the continent. We listen. We let the silence hold us, respecting the possibility that the world's oldest truths are patient and that in the end, the greatest of them are content to remain not quite found. Whenever you're ready to go deeper, whenever you want to keep pace with the ancient wind and the soft, slow shift of ice, just whisper next. And we'll continue to drift forward together in the growing hush of Earth's forgotten archives. If you've ever tried to trace a legend back to its first moment, you know it's a hopeless task. In Antarctica, as everywhere, stories arise not just from single events, but from the friction between longing and fact, a friction that is the very heart of human experience. Each generation brings its own light and questions, and so myths drift and change, acquiring new meanings as the old contours blur into the white. The tale of hidden pyramids is no exception. For some, the idea is a playful indulgence, the mental equivalent of seeing shapes in the clouds on a summer day. For others, it's an engine for serious speculation, a challenge to established timelines, a dare issued to the blank sections of human history. But beneath both approaches, the story persists because it embodies an impulse larger than either, the desire to reconcile what we see with what we want to see, to let the boundaries of reality remain elastic, if only in the space of a question. In the hushed hours common to polar nights, a time when exterior and interior silence merge, it becomes natural to reflect on why these stories do not fade, even when the evidence grows more precise. Maybe it's because, on some level, everyone senses the limits of their own understanding and recognizes, with a kind of relief, that those limits are not so much walls as invitations. Science, at its best, works in the same spirit. Each confirmed fact about Antarctica, the age of the rocks, the layers of the ice, the migration of the continents, sits atop strata of uncertainty. Every certainty ends up being a foothold for the next question. Even among those who have seen with their own eyes the difference between a sharp-edged mountain and an artifact placed by human hands, there is respect for how the labyrinths of nature can imitate and surpass the artifice of civilization. Humanity's greatest discoveries have been made by those who first allowed themselves to imagine a different answer. This is not an endorsement of wishful thinking, but a reminder of the power of patient, open-ended attention. A discipline nurtured both in the cold silence of research outposts and the fevered haze of speculation far from the poles. So too does the physical world refuse to settle wholly into clarity. No matter how much ice is measured, drilled, or melted, the continent remakes itself. Ice flows refill old valleys, expose new peaks, open rifts, or seal them with drift and wind. Patterns glimpsed one season are erased the next. An anomaly in the data one year might be clarified, only to be replaced by new data whose meaning is not yet known. People have said that to live or work in Antarctica is like being in a place where the world is perpetually writing its first chapter. Every horizon is as clean as a page, yet unwritten. Memory here is not just preserved in the ice, but rewritten in the living minds of everyone who bears witness. Their recollections altered by the hush, the light, the shifting snow. This same atmosphere breeds humility. Few come here expecting to be heroes. Most, if not all, leave with a sharper sense of their own smallness. The land offers space to listen to the world as it dreams beneath itself, to accept that not every question needs an answer, and that the persistence of mystery may be the greater gift. And yet, for all the patience, there is an undercurrent of daring, a hunger to be the lucky one who finds something no one else imagined. The ice remains patient, but people rarely do. Perhaps that's another reason myths never let go. They invite each new observer to become a participant in a story that, by definition, cannot be finished. The possibility that something is waiting, that the next scan, the next season, the next pale ridge thawing under an unfamiliar sun could change everything. This is the flame that keeps explorers warm in the cold. Technology, for all its sensitivity, is not immune to the awe and unease that old legends carry. Each time a new instrument is devised, sharper imaging, deeper drilling, more nuanced interpretation, it is wielded as much against our own blindness as against the blank spaces of the world. The act of looking becomes both technical and spiritual. We chase not just the truth at the bottom of the world, but the hope that truth itself is roomy enough to hold something unexpected. Modern myths are not isolated from science. They operate alongside it, sometimes in tension, sometimes in a loose alliance, driving curiosity to greater heights. Even the most skeptical scientist who maps a glacier or codes a satellite still operates with a sliver of wonder, a secret thrill, when the data doesn't quite add up. This is not superstition. It is the necessary humility that makes discovery possible. And so, the stories self-renew in the drifting conversations of the present and the digital archives that will outlast even our loudest debates. As long as there are ambiguous images, as long as there are unsolved signals in the rock, as long as the snow falls to cover what the light reveals, the cycle will persist. Try to hold the scale of it in your mind. The miles of ice, the weight of stone, the passage of millennia. Even the blackest peak you see today, that object of speculation and wonder, will be hidden again in the next cycle of accumulation, pressed beneath layers of oblivion, then unveiled once more for eyes human or otherwise yet unborn. Every era's question becomes the next era's answer, and then inevitably, another era's myth. As we come to rest in this thought, a world not yet done with mystery, it becomes clear that the echo beneath the ice is not trying to keep anything from us. Instead, it's inviting us, with ancient patience, to keep looking, keep questioning, keep remembering the difference between emptiness and endless possibility. If you wish, we can explore. Further still, there are always more shadows, more data, and more dreams waiting beyond every drifting snowfield. Just say the word, and we will follow the echo together, step by step, into whatever story the deep archive will let us glimpse next. So, we go on step by deliberate step, snow muffling each footfall, the outline of the land shifting ahead and behind us as we move deeper into the white. The further in you travel, the more Antarctica becomes less a place and more an experience. A mosaic of sensation and doubt, repetition and revelation, silence, and the low pulse of comprehension that comes when you realize you are standing on the edge of all previous memory. It's here, in the midst of this vast quiet, that you sense the real heart of the legend. It retreats from your grasp the closer you come, shape-shifting away from easy answers, resisting any attempt to be completely pinned down. Maybe that is because the myth of the Antarctic pyramid, or any great myth, isn't only about what is absent or hidden beneath the ice, but also about the echo within us. Everyone who spends time contemplating the peninsula, the interior, or even just the shifting digital renderings of shadow and rock, knows this. Antarctica has the power to reflect your own questions back at you. It doesn't respond with solutions or rebukes. It simply regards your curiosity, your hope, your awe, and it offers silence in exchange. It's a silence that neither confirms nor denies, a silence pregnant with cycles of change and the certainty that nothing is still forever. What you learn here, if you're careful and honest, is how to listen to that silence. With every expedition, every slow drill into the ice, every sensor lowered into a glacial rift, every packet of data bounced from satellite to desk, the world gains a new sliver of story, but never the whole story, never the final word. Somewhere, a core of ancient ice is carefully stored in a laboratory freezer, awaiting the next scientist's attention. Within that cylinder of blue-white clarity are bands marking ancient droughts, traces of ash from volcanoes forgotten and unnamed, signs of migrations in ocean currents, and the faint hints of ancient life arriving as dust. That column of ice is both time machine and uncertain mirror, holding more knowledge than we know how to ask for. Other stories live in the soft mismatch between satellite images and the ground truth they promise. What appears to be a triangle, so sharp and emphatic from above, may be wind-carved scree, or sculpted ridge, or in rare cases, something yet to be explained. But even as measurement gets finer and models get more complex, some anomalies persist. Persist, not because they resist all reason, but because the act of searching is endless. New instruments bring new illusions, new noise to filter, and new whispers of ancient patterns. This, ultimately, is the pattern that Antarctica most reliably sets: discovery and disappearance, clarity and confusion, science and dream fencing, and yielding in turn. It is why those who work here, in whatever capacity, return to their other lives with a different kind of patience. The white horizon, whether glimpsed once or every day, for years, slows your mind in ways the world seldom allows elsewhere. You learn to be at home with the unfinished, to find companionship in mystery, to recognize meaning even in slowness and repetition. And you learn that longing isn't a flaw in human perception, but a feature. It is what pushes researchers into the dark, what encourages explorers even now, with satellites and global predictability, to seek out what remains unmapped. Every generation inherits its own pixelated myths, its own ungrounded legends, and must decide what to do with the allure of the unseen. If the pyramids are ever found, or disproved, or recast as something entirely new, Antarctica itself will not change its character. It will continue to drift through cycles of sun and wind and darkness, remaking the map beneath its shroud. The stones will persist, the snow will record, and the sky will hold its secrets until the rhythm of curiosity leads someone else to ask an old question in a new way. For now, across the world, people slip into sleep lulled by the knowledge that not every story must be finished. There is humility in this, and peace. The silence and the snow are not an emptiness, but an archive of what might still be. Listen long enough, and even in the calm, you sense the echo, growing quiet but insistent, reminding you how rare it is for a place or a person to carry so much unspent wonder. Eventually, after so much wandering between data and dreams, the horizon itself becomes a kind of steady companion. The search ceases to be for a final answer and becomes simply the act of paying close attention. Places like Antarctica whisper that, in the end, it is not possessing the secret that matters, but returning over and over to the place where the question still lives. Life here is made of these cycles. From the first explorers who traveled under canvas and sail, risking all for a single glimpse of land where none had seen before, to today's scientists measuring the air or drilling down for traces of ancient warmth, Antarctica reshapes those who come. They absorb the lessons of the land, that change unfolds in centuries, that the silence of a windless day may hold more weight than 1,000 debates, that the Earth's greatest stories are recorded in what endures and what disappears. Sometimes a day on the ice passes with little to mark its movement. A low sun circles slowly through the sky, casting blue shadows from a row of exposed black peaks, the so-called pyramids that persist, patient and undemanding, while ice and rumor drift past. The smallest details become meaningful. A certain ridgeline made sharp in morning light, a crevasse that has opened where yesterday there was none. Over the radio, voices crackle across hundreds of miles. Someone at one outpost reports an unexpected reading from the ground, penetrating radar signal that looks slightly strange, recurved, almost symmetrical. Another, miles away and days later, shares news of a weather anomaly, a sudden warmth or a pattern of cloud that no model had predicted. Each event is entered into the archive, cross-referenced and stored, a potential thread to be followed or dropped as the seasons demand. Meanwhile, networks of satellites pass overhead in quiet coordination, their orbits regular, their data relentless. Every new pass brings a fresh set of images, slightly different. A new perspective on a familiar formation, a slant of light exaggerating features once indistinct, bringing to life new shadows for the eye to puzzle over. With each image, another theory stirs, another blank filled with meaning, another chance for the world to surprise. In the storerooms and labs, cores of ice and riverine mud are cataloged, split, examined, and replaced in their beds of cold. Each one contains a stack of epochs, the pollen from a vanished forest, the chemical residue of 1,000 ancient storms, the frozen breath of animals and plants now long extinct. Scientists read these cores the way archivists read brittle scrolls, carefully, reverently, knowing that any one section might rewrite understandings held for generations. Within this endless process, no two discoveries are ever exactly alike. Sometimes the core seems almost silent, the record neat and regular, the chemical signals rising and falling with the predictable rhythm of glacial advance and retreat. Other times, most times, if we're honest, the sample spikes and stutters, revealing the signature of catastrophe. Ash from a distant eruption, a pulse of strange chemical isotopes, a period of violent, shifting cold. Each time this happens, each time the archive breaks its own pattern, curiosity flickers anew. What happened in those lost ages? Was there fire in the sky, or flood, or the relentless migration of animals and forests across a continent in slow collapse? The math and chemistry must answer as best they can, but the mind always leaves space for story, for the possibility that more has happened than we can ever measure. For those who live and work in Antarctica, this cycle, the weaving together of observation and imagination, of precision and yearning, comes as naturally as sleep. Each little camp and research base becomes a miniature world, its own bubble of order and laughter, ritual and fatigue. Over mugs of something hot, with the wind rattling outside, the long night is filled with stories, new and old. Sometimes these are tales of real discoveries. The finding of a meteorite, black and pitted from its journey through the solar system, revealed by a change in the snow's color. The extraction of a piece of wood, proof of a time when the ice was jungle. A microbe revived from a drop of ancient lake water, silent for millennia until sun and air called it back to life. Sometimes they are legends, rumors of old expeditions, half remembered, or the imagined voices of explorers glimpsed in the shimmer of a mirage, or the unproven but always retold theory that beneath a particular ridge, the pattern of the rocks is simply too deliberate to be chance. In Antarctica, there is no real need to tell these apart. The ordinary and the extraordinary, the measurable and the hopeful, overlap and entwine like currents beneath pack ice, each making the other more possible. This is the gift of the quiet places, the endurance of the world's extremes, not the promise of final clarity, but the encouragement to keep listening, to notice, truly notice what persists and what changes, to yield gently to the fact that sometimes an invitation is all a story needs to be true in the deepest sense. So night passes, day blurs into twilight, and the black triangles in the snow remain, sometimes almost invisible in the glare, sometimes striking and peculiar, always patient. The people drift in and out, some returning year after year, others leaving for good, all transformed by the certainty that wonder and evidence are not enemies, but the twin halves of what it means to pay attention to a vast, unfinished planet. When at last the station heaters go quiet and only a handful of watchers remain, it's possible to step outside just for a breath and listen to the dull whisper of old snow blown against rock. In that moment, nothing answers, and everything does. The myth reforms, the memory persists, and so does the deep, living silence beneath the ice, waiting for the next telling. There are some things that can only be learned from places that resist certainty. Antarctica, in this way, becomes both subject and teacher, offering a syllabus written in wind, absence, and patient transformation. Each observer, no matter how rigorous or skeptical, eventually finds themselves drawn into rhythms older than knowledge itself. The shape of this education changes with the seasons. In summer, sun and sleep blend, and routine is held loosely. Experiments stretch through what would elsewhere be called midnight, and laughter spills out across empty courtyards, sharp in the dry, frozen air. In these moments, the world feels newly minted. Everything, even the smallest shadow, is an opening for discovery. In winter, the opposite. Darkness presses against the walls, and the mind turns inward. The calendar becomes unreliable, and days are measured more by shared meals and fleeting conversations than by clocks or the sun. It is in these stretches of near solitude that questions previously set aside come to haunt you. Who else has stood here and wondered? What else has come and vanished, and perhaps left some unrecognized trace beneath the glacial night? In all seasons, Antarctica holds up a cool, crystal mirror. Stand too long in that reflection, and the boundary between your questions and the world's own inner workings starts to dissolve. The harshness outside breeds candor inside. People confess hopes and doubts and confide how the tiniest oddities in the ice ripple, a dark line, an unexpected echo, sometimes seem to press more keenly than any charted route or scheduled result. That's why the return to legend is never far. Even as measurements become finer and sensors more sensitive, the lived experience never fully aligns with what the numbers suggest. There is always another layer, another story flickering just at the edge of certainty. A rumor of something ancient, unresolved, perhaps uncanny, carried in by the wind or glimpsed from the corner of an exhausted eye. Somewhere, a satellite will soon scan another patch of white and black, and in the data, a familiar triangle will take shape. On some forum half a world away, someone will draw the lines, mark the angles, and pose the oldest new question. Was this made by chance or by design? Elsewhere, a geologist woken early by sun pouring sideways through the icehouse window will walk out alone and trace the ridges of a Nunatak with her gaze, noting how much sharper it looks when the weather is clear. Before breakfast, she'll log her observation, careful to distinguish fact from flourish, but aware, as scientists always are, that observation is never simply passive, that every act of seeing changes what is seen, even just a little. This is not despair, nor is it capitulation to myth. It's a kind of treaty, a mutual recognition that truth in such a landscape is always layered, always shifting. What's measurable today may be mysterious tomorrow, and vice versa. To stand on Antarctica's ice is to agree to be humbled, unfinished, and, paradoxically, more aware, not less. The longer you stay, the more you notice the world subtly pushing back against the urge to connect every dot. At first, the black shapes in the horizon all seem to promise answers, maybe even evidence, if you're lucky. But soon enough you realize that meaning slips away, and instead, you're left with something more profound. The certainty that the story is not bound to human expectations or even to human memory. It is, instead, a story of patience without end. An archive that writes itself anew with every storm or season. And so, each new legend is, in a real sense, a part of that endless story. It does not have to be true in order to be necessary. The myth reframes the landscape. The landscape, in its own way, reframes the myth. Each gives the other a reason to endure. What would the world be, after all, if every riddle had been answered, every shadow mapped, every echo stilled? The Antarctic pyramids, real or not, preserve a space for hope, for further searching, for the grace of not yet knowing. In their endurance through ice ages, through generations, through the fleeting warmth of each believer and the slow, meticulous presence of each scientist, they promise not resolution, but the possibility of wonder renewed. In the end, you realize the whisper beneath the ice isn't only geology, or memory, or the rumor of lost builders. It is the quiet invitation to keep looking, to accept mystery as a companion, and to recognize, in the white silence, humanity's oldest gift, the courage to ask one more question. And still, the continent endures, never hurrying, never explaining, never rushing toward any conclusion. The patience that is built into Antarctica's geology becomes a kind of patience in those who linger here, whether physically or in imagination. Here, the line between fact and story blurs, not from confusion, but from respect. Respect for what is unknown, for what takes time, for what cannot be rushed into light. As researchers pack up another season's instruments and samples, there's always the reckoning with what was not found. The anomaly that did not resolve, the shadow in the scan that gave way to ordinary stone, the measurement that hovered just outside the margin of error. Yet none of this is wasted. Each null result is a deepening of the archive, a strengthening of our sense that the world is not obliged to yield its treasures, but invites us to return patiently, again and again. The summer sun rides higher, shadows shrink, snow softens on the surface. In these weeks, the landscape relaxes. What seemed forbidding and impenetrable 2 months ago feels almost gentle, nearly familiar. The black peaks wear their shawl of meltwater for a short time, then begin to gather fresh powder as the temperature shifts and the sun starts its descent. It is the oldest conversation between fire and frost, between slow growth and slow forgetting. Those who remain until the last plane leaves often speak later of a transformation they can hardly articulate. Antarctica quiets all noise but wonder. It brings the stories, the data, the years of effort to a common measure. What is left, when all the talk subsides, is the awareness that we are observers inside a living archive, and that the archive is not here to explain itself to us. Some nights, when all seems especially still, it's easy to picture the world outside the station as ready for a new beginning. The ice, stretching on, bearing within its crystal structure the history of everything it has buried and reshaped. New snow falls, and with it, perhaps, the outline of a forgotten stream, a hint of warmth, a particle from the sky, older than the continent itself. The cycle resumes. Back in the warmth, as journals are closed and last emails are sent, it's common, almost inevitable to look once more at the satellite photos, to linger over those black shapes which gave rise to so much wondering. No answer has arrived, and none has been disproved. Instead, the myth stands as it always has, a companion in uncertainty, a kind of secret handshake across time between all who have ever looked at the far horizon and asked if there might be more. And perhaps there is more. Or perhaps, as the unhurried drift of the continent suggests, the act of asking is its own kind of answer. The legend, with its echoes of lost architecture and primordial ambition, persists precisely because it has never been completed, never been disproven, never been fully grasped. It lives not by evidence, but by the rhythm of wonder and the depth of our attention. So, if your eyes have grown accustomed, if your breath has matched the slow pulse of the ice, you already understand what the Antarctic silence is saying. Not everything need be solved, and not all stories are waiting to be unmasked. Some mysteries are not gaps in our knowledge, but the necessary shadows that give all knowledge its shape. As the wind hushes and the first cold of the returning dark arrives, the white grows wider again, swallowing up the tracks of those who briefly crossed its surface, leaving only the faintest interruption in the oldest archive in the world. Somewhere another winter begins its slow descent across the continent. Lights inside the station glow softly, isolated on the plain, as if marking a human heartbeat against the endless reach of cold and dark. Outside, the land settles into its old rhythms, the steady shifting of ice, the migration of wind, the silent falling of snow that erases yesterday's steps and prepares the world for whatever comes next. Inside, the conversation never truly ends. Even as some settle into sleep, others page through reports, scan new images, or share, quietly, the kinds of questions that thrive only in places where answers feel far away. What will next season reveal? Will new cracks in the ice bring old secrets to the surface? What strangeness in the data will persist and demand one more look, one more theory, one more story told after midnight when the aurora stirs the sky? There is a peculiar faith built here in patience, in the slow accumulation of evidence, in the idea that the land is not indifferent but waiting, bearing witness not only to our search, but to our willingness to wonder without haste. The pyramids of Antarctica, then, become more than legend or hypothesis. They are symbols of this discipline. They are invitations to dwell in uncertainty, to trust long processes, to find solace in cycling between knowing and not knowing. For those who come here dreaming of discovery, the greatest discovery of all is this transformation. The sharp need to explain, to map, to settle the legend into one category or another, is worn smooth by the silence and by the sight of stone and snow sharing the same patient, untroubled endurance. On dark days, with only the wind as company, the mind returns to patterns and principles inherited from ancestors far from the ice. Is it so strange that we wish for kinship, for signs that someone was here before, that someone left a mark, a message, a structure resisting the melt and the grind? These stories are not just about Antarctica, they are about time, about the hope that we are not the first to want to be remembered, nor the last to want our questions to matter. So the black triangles and the white vastness continue their quiet partnership. Sometimes they are only mountains and ice. Sometimes lifted by the desire of those who look, they become something more. A meeting point between what the planet cares to preserve and what we most hope to find. And in this, the myth finds its truest form, not as a promise of revelation, but as the persistence of hope when revelation is delayed. For generations to come, people will scan new images, test new readings, awaken from new dreams with the memory of sharp peaks beneath snow, not because they expect closure, but because the rhythm of seeking and reseeking is what keeps wonder alive. For now, Antarctica sleeps and waits, and so do we. And in our waiting, we are not alone, but joined across years and distance to all others who have ever paused on the edge of a blank page, listening for the next whisper beneath the ice. If you could stand far above the continent, high enough to see the curve of the earth and the pale cap spread like a quiet crown, you'd notice how Antarctica doesn't look like a destination. It looks like a boundary, a place where the world's familiar textures thin out until only two elements remain: light and absence. From that distance, the myths make a certain kind of sense. When a place appears so blank, the mind assumes it must be hiding something, because surely nothing on Earth is truly empty. But emptiness in Antarctica is rarely what it seems. The blankness is a cover, not a void. Beneath it, the planet is busy in its own slow way, always shifting weight, always rearranging pressure, always whispering movement under what appears still. The ice presses down with the mass of mountains. The bedrock yields and flexes. In places where ice thins or retreats, land rises again in a long geological exhale. Nothing is fixed, only delayed. This is why the continent is so hard to finish in the mind. Each time you try to resolve it into certainty, it slips into another form. A mountain becomes a pyramid in one kind of light, and a rough, broken ridge in another. A radar return suggests a smooth surface, then a higher resolution pass reveals fractures and folds. A map shows a clean triangle, then ground truth shows scree, ice crust and shadows lying to the eye. And yet, even when the explanation is complete, the feeling remains. The feeling is stubborn because it isn't built out of facts alone. It's built out of scale. Scale changes everything. A mile of ice is difficult to imagine until you've stood on it and felt the way it swallows sound. 2 miles is nearly impossible. And in some places, the ice approaches those depths and beyond pressing down on a hidden world that cannot be walked, only inferred. The idea that anything might be down there, mountains, lakes, ancient soils, trapped atmospheres, stops being theoretical and becomes tactile. You can almost feel it under your feet, the weight of time compacted into matter. That is why even the most skeptical mind can, for a moment, pause. Because if the ice can preserve air from ancient forests, if it can shelter life in dark water for ages, if it can hide entire mountain ranges with the ease of a blanket over furniture, then the mind naturally asks what else it could conceal. Not because it wants to fabricate, because it knows the planet is capable of more than we often allow. And so the internet stories, the old legends, the speculative maps and whispered coordinates, these become modern folklore orbiting a real geological truth. Antarctica is an archive, and archives invite imagination. There's another reason the story persists, quieter than all the debates and diagrams. The pyramid is not only a shape, it's a symbol of permanence in a world that constantly erases. We build pyramids to defy time, to say, this mattered, and it will keep mattering. We stack stone into triangles because triangles survive. We look at old pyramids and feel an unsettling sense of continuity, as if the builders were not so far from us after all. To imagine pyramids in Antarctica is to imagine permanence in the least permanent place. Ice shifts, ice hides, ice grinds, ice forgets the surface and preserves what lies deeper. A pyramid under ice becomes, in the mind, the ultimate defiance architecture sealed away from weather, vandalism, war, and decay. A monument protected by the very harshness that makes the continent unlivable. Even if it isn't true, the symbolism is powerful enough to keep the image alive. Sometimes, that image merges with another modern fascination, the idea that humanity's timeline is incomplete. Not merely missing details, but missing entire eras. We live with the official story because it is coherent and measurable, but every so often a discovery appears that nudges the edges outward. A site older than expected. A tool found where no one expected people to have been. A structure whose sophistication seems to arrive too early. Each of these discoveries, real and grounded, is enough to make the mind wonder what else might be missing. Not as conspiracy, but as the natural result of time's habit of erasing. If one village can vanish under jungle in a few centuries, if one coastline can disappear under rising seas, if entire cultures can be reduced to pottery shards and faint earthworks, then what does ice do over tens of thousands of years? It compresses, it hides, it smooths the surface into innocence. The scientific record tells us that Antarctica's deep interior has been ice-dominated far longer than human civilization. That matters. It's the strongest anchor we have. But the human mind doesn't live by anchors alone. It also lives by possibility. And possibility is what the continent offers in endless supply. The practical reality is that real exploration here is expensive, dangerous, and slow. Each expedition is a choreography of fuel, weather windows, aircraft, survival planning, and equipment that must function in temperatures that can destroy metal. A single storm can rewrite months of preparation. A crevasse can swallow a vehicle. Frost can damage sensors in minutes. Even the air itself, so dry and thin, behaves differently than most humans are used to, stealing moisture, cracking lips, making small tasks feel heavier. The cost of truth is high. So, the distance between image and verification remains, and in that distance, stories thrive. But there's something else worth holding on to. Even if no pyramids are there, Antarctica is still filled with impossible things that are real. Lakes under miles of ice. Mountains hidden like secret spines. Rivers running in darkness. Microbes living without sunlight. Meteorites preserved like artifacts from the birth of the solar system. This is what makes the place so uniquely soothing for the curious mind. It doesn't need invented marvels, it already has them. The planet, left alone for long enough, produces wonders that look like fantasy only quieter. So perhaps the right way to carry the pyramid story is not as a verdict, but as a doorway. A doorway into deeper appreciation for what the continent truly is. The planet's cold vault, its slow library, its most extreme archive. And when we accept that, the fascination becomes less fragile. It no longer depends on proving a myth. It rests on something sturdier. The certainty that Earth still holds places that can surprise us, and that the most ancient secrets are not kept behind walls, but under layers. Layers we may never fully peel away. The wind continues as it always does, brushing snow across rock, erasing lines, drawing new ones. A satellite passes overhead, gathering another set of images. Somewhere, a researcher adjusts an instrument and watches a stream of numbers scroll by, searching for the signal inside the noise. Somewhere else, someone at home scrolls past the same polar coordinates and feels that familiar quiet thrill. What if? And so, the whisper beneath the ice remains what it has always been, a low murmur at the edge of perception, not demanding belief, only attention. It asks nothing from us except that we keep listening with humility. If you listen long enough, you begin to notice that Antarctica doesn't just resist being understood, it resists being rushed. Every human instinct that wants to hurry an answer is softened here, like edges sanded down by wind. It's not a place that rewards force. It rewards returning. It rewards careful repetition. It rewards the quiet kind of devotion that doesn't demand the world prove itself on command. That's true for science, and it's true for story. The satellite images that sparked so much imagination were never meant to carry prophecy. They were snapshots brief, angled glances of a landscape that changes its mask with every shift of light. Yet the mind seized them the way the mind always seizes a fragment that looks like it might complete a larger picture. We held those triangles up to the oldest symbol we know, pyramids, and suddenly the continent felt less distant, less alien. We had a word for it, a shape for it, a familiar pattern we could place inside our history. And maybe that's what we were really doing. Not discovering Antarctica, but placing ourselves inside it. Because the idea of pyramids at the bottom of the world isn't only about ancient builders. It's about continuity. It's about refusing to believe that the story starts where our records start. It's about the ache of looking at a planet that has lived so many lives and realizing that our own chapter is small and perhaps not as complete as we thought. Antarctica sharpens that realization. It is a reminder that Earth has had entire identities before this one. Warm eras with forests, cold eras with expanding ice, times when oceans circulated differently and coastlines sat in places we would not recognize. The ice is not only a blanket, but a boundary between worlds, the world as it is now and the world as it has been. So when we ask what lies beneath the ice, we are asking two questions at once. The first is literal. What is physically there? Rock, water, sediment, life? The second is personal. What might we find that would change how we feel about being human on a planet that forgets so easily? In that second question, the pyramid becomes less an object and more a metaphor, a marker of how we long for meaning to outlast us, a symbol of our desire to be remembered, to leave behind something stable in a universe that is mostly motion and erasure. Yet the strange comfort of Antarctica is that it does not require us to leave monuments to be meaningful. The continent itself is a monument, an immense, silent structure built by physics and time. It stands without intention and still overwhelms the imagination. It is proof that the world can be grand without witnesses, that beauty can exist without being for anyone. And perhaps that is what makes it so calming to think about, even when the subject is uncertainty. In a loud world full of demands, Antarctica asks nothing. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't advertise. It simply is. Still, Even the quietest places are not untouched by us. The modern world reaches here, not with cities, but with instruments and traces. Research stations leave footprints. Fuel and metal alter small patches of snow. Microplastics travel on wind and ocean currents farther than we once thought possible. Even the air trapped in new layers of snow carries signals of industrial activity from thousands of miles away. The ice is recording us now. That is one of the most haunting truths hidden in plain sight. The planet's archive doesn't just hold the ancient past, it is writing the present into itself with perfect neutrality. A future ice core taken 1,000 years from now will contain chemical signatures of our era changes in greenhouse gases, traces of combustion, residues of technology. The planet will remember us not by our names, but by our chemistry. Not by our stories, but by the imprint we leave in air and snow. And that shifts the pyramid myth into a new light. If we are searching for evidence of a lost civilization beneath the ice, we should remember that we are also becoming evidence. We are also leaving behind a layer. The difference is that we can watch ourselves doing it. We can feel the weight of the moment. The idea of forgotten builders in Antarctica is compelling partly because it forces us to imagine being forgotten. It asks us to picture our own world buried, compressed, erased, and then rediscovered by beings who know nothing of our languages or our motives. Would they recognize our cities as cities, our roads as roads? Or would it all be smoothed into geology, misread as chance, turned into their own myths, the way we turn Nunataks into pyramids? In that sense, the Antarctic pyramid story is a mirror that reflects forward as much as backward. It suggests that mystery is not only behind us, it is ahead of us. The future will look back at our time with the same partial evidence and the same hunger for pattern. They will make stories too, and that quietly is one of the most human realizations in this entire subject. We are not unique in our uncertainty. We inherit it, and we pass it on. This is why even a debunked shape can remain meaningful. Not because it proves ancient architecture, but because it reveals the architecture of our minds. How we assemble narrative from shadow. How we hunger for cohesion across continents and eras. How we want the Earth to hold a coherent message rather than a chaotic ledger of chance. But Antarctica teaches a different kind of coherence. One built not on intention, but on rhythm. Glaciers advance and retreat. Ice sheets breathe with climate cycles. CO2 rises and falls over millennia. Ocean currents rearrange. Mountains uplift and erode. The planet writes patterns, not the kind that can be decoded like a cipher, but the kind that can be felt like music when you stop trying to force it into words. This is where science and wonder stop fighting and become companions. Science gives us methods to hear that music more clearly. Wonder gives us the reason to keep listening when the song is slow. So the story drifts onward, as it always has, from one set of images to another, from one generation's theories to the next generation's tools, from skeptics who insist on caution to dreamers who insist on possibility. Between them, the continent remains unchanged in spirit even as its ice subtly shifts. And if you step back far enough, you can see the shape of the entire conversation. A blurry photograph appears. A pattern is recognized. A story forms. Science explains what can be explained. The explanation satisfies some, but not all. The remaining gap becomes a new home for wonder, and the cycle begins again, like snowfall. That cycle isn't a problem. It's a feature of being alive on a planet that will always be larger than our certainty. In the end, the question, are there pyramids in Antarctica? May matter less than what it reveals about how we confront the unknown. The unknown is not just a lack of information. It is a space where the mind meets its own limits and decides whether to close in fear or open in curiosity. Antarctica invites opening. It invites the slow kind of curiosity that doesn't need a final reveal to feel satisfied. It invites reverence for what exists, whether or not it was meant to be seen. It invites us to remember that mystery is not failure. Mystery is the beginning of attention. And so, as the wind passes over those dark slopes pyramids to some, peaks to others, you can almost imagine the sound beneath the sound. A low ancient murmur like stone remembering sunlight, like ice remembering forests, like the planet holding every era at once. The whisper beneath the ice.